All right, it appears that we are live. Sorry again for the delay. I saw somebody said, did the doctor forget to eat dinner again? No, just the logistics of trying to get set up here. So let's see. Let's make sure we are. How's the sound? Somebody want to give me a little response in the chat? How's the sound? You guys, everybody hearing me all right? All good? The Kaiser, all good? Hi, Glenn. Sounds great. Thanks, Dan. Excellent. Very good. All right. As people start kind of gathering in here, just a quick little chit chat intro before we get started on our book study tonight, which is really going to be good. I think you're going to really enjoy it. Obviously, the big news of the day, the whole Mueller report thing came out with the Attorney General Barr just basically exonerating Trump and have the media just having a meltdown over that in Hollywood because they recognize now Trump is a two-term president. They focus so much and they put so much effort on they were all in on this one stock that was supposed to yield massive dividends, which was Trump colluded with Russia. All these, indictments were going to be handed down to him and his kids and everybody around him and it all just blew up in their face. They have horrible candidates for president. They know they've lost. And I think it's going to take a few, I don't know, I was going to say a few weeks, but maybe a few months for them to just kind of finally accept it, go to the next stage of grief, right? And just begin to accept and just get mad and then plan for 2024. But I think the bigger news in many respects, and I know a lot of you know that, was the poll that came out. I think it was a YouGov poll, which is very accurate, generally speaking, that found that the new party, Nigel Farage's Brexit party, was the number one party in Britain by far. And it's not even a week old. I mean, it just doesn't get better than that. I mean, it's not even a week old. He announced it on April 12th. And they're now polling at 27%, 29? That's the latest one, 27. Yeah. So they've been polling them every other day or so. So when he announced they were 15%, the Brexit party, then a few days later, just a couple, YouGov found they were at 22%. And then a few days later, boom, this 27, almost 30%, almost 1 out of 3 Brits are voting for the Brexit party, or they're claiming they're going to vote for the Brexit party on May 26th for the European elections. Stunning. Absolutely stunning. Labor's at 23%. So that's pretty significantly behind. And then the Conservatives are just cratered to 15%, as they ought. They were embarrassing throughout this whole Brexit process. Now, what's interesting is I know Farage, a lot of people, and this is going to be our first video tomorrow morning. It was going to be loaded up today, but the Barr announcement of the Mueller probe finding absolutely nothing whatsoever wrong with the Trump campaign or obstruction of justice or anything like that. I had to put that up just because of the immediateness in the news. Whereas this is going to be far more relevant. The Brexit polls are going to be far more relevant as we go along. But what we're finding is that a lot of people I know are not very happy with Farage. He left UKIP. They don't like what he said about Tommy Robinson. I understand all that. I share a lot of that. But I'll talk about this tomorrow morning. I think Farage is on to something. And I think it's two things. Number one, he recognizes this thing called de-alignment that we're going to be talking about tonight, where loyalty to the traditional parties is at its lowest point ever in polling. So the opportunities for new parties to emerge and just shoot us into new directions and shoot literally the continent of Europe in new directions via the May elections has never been riper. And I think he senses that. So Farage is a very keen political mind. Ever since he stormed on the scene, what was it, back in 2004 when UKIP first won EU elections? So I think that's number one, is I think he sees an excellent opportunity. And he's obviously right. The polls are bearing him out. Number two, you have to understand all so-called far-right parties have to go through a process that Marine Le Pen referred to as de-diabolization. So I know it's a pathetically cumbersome word. De-diabolization. It's also known as de-demonization. And that is where the leaders of a party and the various politicians representing that party have to begin a public relations process where they appear and are perceived by the wider public, by the national public, as mainstream. This is not watering down their positions per se, but it is reframing them in such a way that enables them to cut through all the stigma that tends to get thrown against nationalist parties. Everyone's had to do this who's successful. Okay, everyone's had to do this. National rallies had to do this. Matteo Salvini's Lega Nord has had to do this. Remember, the Italian, as they're called now, the Italian League just 5 years ago was basically a secessionist movement for northern Italy, which tends to be conservative, from southern Italy, which tends towards liberalism. And so they were called Northern League, Lega Nord. It was Matteo Salvini that mainstreamed them and made them the Italian League. So a lot of parties have had to do this. Thierry Baudet and his Forum for Democracy, he was able to effectively position them as a mainstream party that is making up for the neglect of the center parties in terms of the interests of Dutch people. So everybody has to do it. And I think this is what Farage is trying to do. I think he was frustrated that UKIP wasn't de-diabolizing, if I can make up a term there. For right or for wrong, again, I'm not taking sides. Again, I'm analyzing trends in the end. I love Tommy. You could see we actually have an entire video series on Tommy Robinson. I defended him and the like. But I see this movement as a big movement, this nationalist, populist, traditionalist movement. And Farage is a keen mind in it, keen political sense. And I think he sees something here. So for all we know, the combined vote of the Brexit Party and UKIP could be upwards of around 35 to 40%. Which would be stunning. It may be literally twice, maybe even three times what the Conservatives got. And my, would that send a message to the Conservatives? You would really have a total de-alignment within British politics then. Remember, Trump did something similar, although he took over a party. Trump was a third-party candidate who won a major party nomination. That's the best way of understanding the Trump phenomenon. He could have run third party. He may have won running third party, created his own nationalist party. Instead, he just took over the GOP. So there's different ways of going about this. So anyway, there you go. That's a nice way to set us up here. What are we at? 7:12. All right. Let's see. Let's get started. I think we have, good. We have, the last time I looked at the count of how many were here was 40. Now there's over 400. Awesome. Everybody welcome. All right, here's what we're going to do tonight. We are looking at a very, very good book called National Populism, The Revolt Against Liberal Democracy. We'll get into what that means. It's by Roger Eatwell and Matthew Goodwin. These are political scholars, British political scholars. It's one of the smallest books, I have to say, that I own, and I did not put a link now on my site, but I will put an Amazon link at the end of this if you'd like to pick this up. Nice paperback edition. It is an excellent book and probably the best research out there right now available to us. That explains the rise of nationalist populism, that nationalist populism is not just a fluke. Again, this is what everybody was saying. This is what you heard for months, well, for years after Brexit. It was a fluke. People were misinformed, and people didn't know what they were voting for. Blah blah blah. Same thing with Trump. It was the Russians who did it. It was the voting machines were faulty, and blah blah. I mean, there was all kinds of ways of delegitimizing both Brexit and Trump. This book will give you everything you need to know, to show that is absolute and total nonsense. Brexit and Trump, and they were just a few months removed from each other. Brexit was in June, if I recall, 2016. Trump was in November 2016. So when this channel started, we started November 1st, 2016, and I put forward 7 videos on the from the 1st to the 7th, giving an extended argument of why I believe Trump was going to win, and why all the pundits and the newspapers and the commentators, I thought they were absolutely missing it. When I would listen to their rationale for why Hillary was going to run away with this, they absolutely ignored the data that is in here. Okay. Now I only had, shall we say, a shadow of the data that was in here, but that was enough. Plus some other theorists who were arguing for this massive paradigm shift that we were experiencing at the time. And I believe that was enough to take Trump. I actually based it on Brexit, that the same dynamics that were operative behind Brexit were operative behind Trump. And just as Brexit made it past the finish line, Trump was going to make it past the finish line victorious. These fellows, Eatwell and Goodwin, document the dynamics behind not just Trump, not just Brexit, but the surge of nationalist populism that's been going on all throughout Europe, all throughout the United States. We're seeing it in Canada. Everybody was wondering, when's it going to come to Canada? It's already there. We already did some videos on it with the latest Alberta elections there, in Ottawa just before that, New Brunswick, before that, Quebec. It's coming. It's coming everywhere. We're seeing it with in South America, Jair Bolsonaro, and Brazil. But again, he's the tip of this iceberg of this movement to the right throughout Latin America. I talked about it with the Israeli elections last week. Commentators are now openly saying the left has died in Israel. Israel now officially is made up. Its politics is made up of a center party, a right-wing party, and a so-called far-right party, right? So what we would say is it's basically a center party and then a nationalist right coalition. That's basically how we would look at it. There's no left anymore in Israel, okay? Itzhak Rabin's party, Labor, Ariel Sharon, all these prime ministers, they've been reduced to no more than 6% of the vote. I mean, they're rubble. They're gone, okay? So what's the dynamics behind this? What's going on here? And that's what Roger Eatwell and Matthew Goodwin are doing for us. Just so you know, too, if you're interested, Matthew Goodwin in particular is very, very active in writing articles for British news sites. He's very much often appears on Channel 4 and BBC, and giving excellent commentary to really kind of, I think, turn the whole liberal left-wing identity politics nonsense on its head and say, guys, this is so much deeper than just some fluke election. His scholarship is consistently good. In fact, if you want to tuck away 2 good scholars, Matthew Goodwin and Eric Kaufman. Eric Kaufman, if I recall, is Canadian or was raised in Canada, but he is at University of London. So 2 British scholars who are doing sensational work. They're on the cutting edge of this rise of nationalist, populist traditionalism going all around. Of course, Eric Kaufman is big in demographics and a demographic analysis of the rise of the new nationalism and particularly its religious conservatism. But Eatwell and Goodwin, they give us a very, very impressive kind of overview of the political, economic, and cultural trends that are redefining Europe as we speak. They are redefining the United States in very, very pronounced ways. They make basically if you're following along, I'm going to give you sort of an overarching understanding of what the book is arguing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of break it down for you in sort of manageable portions. And what you'll find is at the end of this live stream, you're going to have a lot of nice data points to be able to share with people. That's a big thing, we want to do. When we are apologists for nationalist populism. Apologia, I don't mean apologizing. I mean apologists in the sense of defenders. That's what apologia means, is to defend what you believe. And we are apologists for nationalist populism, traditionalism, and it makes for a fascinatingly rich conversation with someone who's not familiar with the dynamics behind it and why it is so logical, it is so rational for what is actually happening throughout Europe, particularly, and the United States. There is so much logic behind why we have Trump and the Brexit Party polling is number one as it's 6 days old, and why we have Matteo Salvini as the single most powerful politician in all of Italy, and why we have Viktor Orban and his supermajority that he got in the last elections in April, and why Central Europe as a whole has basically embraced nationalist populism, why most of Eastern Europe, why Russia has returned to sort of a vision of Holy Rus and appropriates a position for the Russian Orthodox Church in their society not seen since the days of the Tsars. Why is this going on? Why did Thierry Baudet go from having 0 seats in the Dutch Senate to all of a sudden being the single biggest party in the Dutch? How did that happen? What's going on here? This is obviously not a fluke. So what's going on? And I think what I'm going to try to do tonight is just give you a really nice, concise overview based on this book. Wonderful book. Again, I really plug it. I want to see plenty of copies bought and support this scholarship. I support it. What is behind all this? What's carrying this? What are the dynamics, the political, economic, and cultural dynamics? So they make 2 overall arguments here. Let's start with that. 2 big themes. First and foremost, as I've already been pointing out, Trump and Brexit and the rise of the nationalist populist leaders, they are not outliers. They are not flukes. They are not unrelated. They are all symptoms of far deeper political, economic, and cultural trends, right? Political, economic, and cultural trends that in many respects are just coming to the surface. They've been there for now a couple of decades, about 3 decades. We'll find it really starts with National Front in the 1980s, more or less. But they've really been there, and they've been simmering, and they've been growing, and now they've broken through ground, and now they're starting to blossom. And so in many respects, this is just the beginning. So it's very exciting. And it should be, and again, this doesn't mean that, populists aren't, populists. This doesn't mean globalists aren't going to, fight back. I mean, look at Brexit, for heaven's sakes, and the frustrations there. Look at what the Democrats were able to achieve with the House of Representatives in the last. It doesn't mean that, they're not going to fight back. What we're looking for is these long-term trajectories that suggest, wow, this is a trend that is just getting started. And so what we're seeing, emerging all over Europe, United States, South America, Canada, and the like, what we're starting to see here are the fruits of much deeper processes that have been going on for quite some time. It has nothing to do with Russian collusion. It has nothing to do with Brexit voters not knowing what they were voting for. It has nothing to do with that nonsense. So that's the first thing. The second broad argument is that these trends have serious long-term potential. So the first one is that these are Trump, Brexit, and the like are all symptoms of far deeper political, economic, and cultural trends that in many ways are just coming to the surface. And then the second broad argument is that these trends have serious long-term potential here, right? And that's, of course, that's captured in our sort of tagline for our channel, that we're, new conservative age really is rising. It's frustrating to no end, as is gardening, by the way. I like to garden, but gardening is not easy. It's not always fun, but it is fruitful. And that's what we are seeing. All right. So what I want to do here now with those two overviews is give you a nice, concise, an overview or outline of this book. I think you'll find it very helpful and very persuasive in being able to share our passion for nationalist populism with a wider audience. All right. First, Eatwell and Goodwin start off very helpfully by debunking some myths, okay? And I'm going to give you five of the major myths about, say, Brexit and Trump. Those are the two representatives of what really started to get this going here. One myth is that Trump voters were basically poor white trash. You've probably heard this before, okay? Trump voters were poor white trash, Pennsatucky folk, rural folk. And so, it's not a formidable coalition or anything like that. And could easily be overwhelmed by the urban vote or metropolitan, cosmopolitan. The problem here is that the average household income of your average Trump voter was actually $72,000, which is $10,000 more than the average supporter for Clinton and Bernie. And the average, nearly $20,000 more than your average wage holder of $56,000. So the average income for your Trump voter is $72,000. Your average income for your Clinton Sanders voter was $61,000. And then the average person here in the States is $56,000. So the Trump voter is actually more wealthy than either the average Democratic voter or just the average American. So that is just patently not true. There's nothing poor, nothing just, solely rural, whatever. Although, to be honest with you, I like rural areas, so I don't find that in any way disparaging. Same with Brexit. Among those with average or just above average incomes, their support for Brexit was 51%. They were in the positive there. So this is just simply objectively not true. It's not just poor white trash, as it were, voting for these nationalist populists. The second myth is that all of this is rooted in an angst that comes from the economic crash of 2008. And once that anxiety eventually subsides, like, with the Great Depression and so on, then this whole populism should subside proportionately. The problem with this view is that populism, the nationalist populist movements, began in Europe long before 2008. They actually started in France in the 1980s with the rise of the National Front. That's when the National Front actually began to break through and make some advances in the electorate. That's when we had Marine Le Pen's father actually running for he was in the runoff for president, if I recall, against Jacques Chirac in the 1980s. Nigel Farage first made his breakthrough into the European Parliament in 2004. And this was after 48 consecutive months of economic growth in Britain. It had nothing to do with bad economic conditions, and it certainly had nothing to do specifically with the 2008 crash. Moreover, similarly, in Scandinavia, the Nordic nations, so Norway and Sweden and Denmark and Finland, as well as in Switzerland, the nationalist populist parties began to emerge in the late 90s and then the aughts, again, long before any kind of economic crash. So once again, this is just a myth. Something deeper than simply economic angst from 2008 is operative here. Another myth is that these were just old, angry white men who voted. It's similar to number one. The voters for both Trump and Brexit were a bunch of angry, old, racist white men and nothing more. And they'll eventually all die out, by the way. So don't worry about it too much. Now, we have to take this old white male caricature one by one. First and foremost, Trump voters and Brexit voters were not old. Many overlook the fact that nationalist populist right is gaining tremendous support from millennials. We actually featured that in one of our recent videos. Is in the end. Can you elaborate that? You mentioned the TBI. Thank you for that, brother. Thank you for the $5. You mentioned the peak of the globalist movement happens at the end. Can you elaborate on that? I'm not sure what you mean. Perhaps you could throw another example of that. What is this? Sorry, can I? What is this? What's all this Jew hater stuff? What is all that? Who brings that in there? This channel has nothing to do with that nonsense, and I don't know why you're here. So, if you don't mind, leave. I mean, I can't stop here and block you from the channel, but I'd like you to go. Thank you. God bless. Who just sent that $5? I missed the name, but thank you so much. Who just sent that for me? That's very, very appreciated. Yeah, for some reason, when we do these live streams, it seems to attract a bunch of neo-Nazi wackos, and I'm not really sure. You don't help this channel. YouTube doesn't like it and will only end up debilitating my channel. And so, I'd appreciate it too if people just stop responding to them. But it really is disgusting. And I don't know why you're here. I have nothing to do with you. I think you're scumbags. So hit the road. All right. Enough. I don't know why you do this. This is a live stream for people who are interested in the rise of nationalist populist traditionalism in a broad sense, and all this silly nonsense that you're throwing out there is pretty disgusting. So anyway, please try to keep the comments to the topics at hand. Thank you very much. They overlook the fact that nationalist populist right is gaining tremendous support from millennials. 41% of white millennials voted for Trump. That's not angry old white men. Same with Brexit. 2/3 of those between the ages of 18 to 34 supported Brexit. In fact, in Britain, as of the spring of 2018, 41% of 18 to 24-year-olds and 58% of 25 to 49-year-olds believed that immigration was just too high in Britain. And we're seeing this. We're seeing that the surveys are showing that millennials and Generation Zers are far more conservative than Generation Xers and baby boomers. And to the run-up in the French election, Marine Le Pen actually enjoyed 40% support from French voters between 18 to 24. The Austrian nationalist right won 42% of voters under the age of 29. The AfD, the Alternative for Germany, has on average one of the youngest membership bases in German politics, an average age of 47. This whole notion that these are old people is bunk. It's a myth. Also, they're not just white. This is what Van Jones did on the night of Trump's election when he went on that screed, that rant that Trump was a white lash. It's a white lash against a black president and all this sort of stuff. Sorry, Trump won around 28% of the Latino vote. He won the majority of the Cuban vote in Florida, the Cuban American vote, and he won the highest percentage of black vote of any Republican since Bob Dole, interestingly enough, which is a very interesting thing, back in 1996. Same with Brexit. 1 in 3, the 33% of Britain's black and ethnic minority voters voted for Brexit. Again, this is not a white-only coalition. And finally, it's not just men. A majority of white women, 53% of white women, voted for Trump. In Britain, women were just as likely, they went down the middle, they were just as likely to vote for Brexit as they were vote to stay and remain. In France, between 1998 and 2017, the percentage of French women between the age of 18 and 26 who voted for the first time supported some kind of Le Pen. Let's see, Pilgrim Driver, you're right. I do need chat moderators. You're right. I don't know what this. I don't know what this is. Do you just sign up for my channel and you just wait for a live stream so you could spew all this bizarre lunacy? It's just very, very odd and very strange. It's like you belong to I don't know, some kind of adult Dungeons and Dragons club or something like that. You know, it's very odd. But anyway, another myth is the nationalist populists are authoritarian and anti-democratic. You'll hear that, and that's even a bit of an illusion, or it could be an inference here with the revolt against liberal democracy. But it's very important to understand that the 2017 voter study survey, very, very extensive group. I got this. TB, thank you for going. You made mention that over the next 2 years, we would see the social justice warrior propaganda rhetoric and end, although peak. Okay, in 2 years, social justice. Did I say that tonight? It is going to end. The question is just simply when. It's going to work itself out into its crazy logical outworkings. Look at what's going on with Mayor Pete, right? You guys are all following Mayor Pete. Mayor Pete is a young, very attractive gay man running for president, but he's now Mojave forever. $5 for telling the Jew haters to take a hike. Amen. Take a freaking hike. Why are you here? It's like you're a bunch of hornets or mosquitoes. Go away. What is your problem? My heavens. I mean, I learned Hebrew, for heaven's sakes. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'et haaretz. I mean, come on. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. I mean, give me a break. This is, I don't know what the heck that is. Anyway, yeah, you take Mayor Pete. Mayor Pete is now being called a privileged white man, the most privileged person in America, because he's white, he's male, and he's gay. So, and then MSNBC commentators saying, look at his audience. They're all white, and no Democratic candidate can win without the black vote. That's never going to happen. So it's killing themselves now. The social justice warrior identity politics rhetoric is actually shooting themselves. And when they start destroying themselves, that's when you can kiss the movement goodbye. We don't have to do anything. It dissolves itself. So that's why I think we're seeing the beginning of the end. I hope that answers your question. All right. So, yeah, the voter study group found that 90% of those who were surveyed throughout Europe and the United States love democracy. They got nothing to, and of course, right now, 30% of them are about to vote for the new Brexit party, right? For the upcoming European elections. 50% of them voted for Trump, and on and on. No, there is no nationalist populist movement right now that has a problem with democracy. What they have a problem with is some aspects of democracy. And what Eatwell and Goodwin make a very helpful distinction between what they call pragmatic democracy and and redemptive democracy. Pragmatic democracy and redemptive democracy. Pragmatic democracy is a democracy that operates among the elites, among the aristocracy, and it is a democracy of that is anti-populist. It often ignores the will of the people, and it functions more in accordance with the will of banks and educational institutions and the professions and the politics and the like. Whereas redemptive democracy is the notion that the best way of keeping culture, custom, and tradition protected is by entrusting it largely to the populace or to the people, and to have their concerns put forward as central to the democratic process. So redemptive democracy is what is being affirmed by every single nationalist populist group out there. Nationalist populists want more democracy. They do not want less. They want more democracy, right? What they're sick and tired of is what they're seeing with, for example, the Brexit bumbling. They see that as the opposite of democracy. They voted for Brexit. Leave means leave. And look at what the Conservatives and Labour are doing to it right now. They're turning it into a mess. Well, we've got these interests we have to worry about. We've got the border, of course, between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. We've got to worry about. We've got to make sure we take care of this treaty. We have to make sure that Brussels is happy here. And they're sick and tired of that. And they're saying, you're just completely ignoring the will of the people for your own aristocratic gain. And so that's the part of democracy they really, really despise. And we'll get into that a little bit with the de-alignment element later on today. So that is a myth. They want more democracy, not less. The myth being that it's anti-democratic. They're all authoritarian. The final myth, again, very often cited, is that this is just 1930s Europe all over again. And unfortunately, I heard this when I was in Italy. I was in the airport. We were leaving Verona, Italy, and I was talking to an Italian gentleman, absolutely wonderful fellow. And he said, "Did you enjoy your stay here?" And I said, "I did very much so. I love Italy and I don't want to leave." Samara, happy Passover, Easter. What's your take on U.S. politics after Trump? Oh, okay. Well, I think based on these trends, I think Trump is a game changer. I do think in the end, Republican politics will never be the same. We called the bluff out, the cat's out of the bag, right? Genie's out of the bottle. We cannot go back to good old fashioned neocon stuff. That coalition has been destroyed with it now, what I believe to be a 2-term victory for the nationalist populist traditionalist coalition. So I'm sure Pence is going to be running and he'll run as a nationalist populist traditionalist. And now don't be surprised. Now, just like what you see, the opposite of the Democratic Party, everybody's trying to out-socialize. Everybody's trying to out-socialist Bernie Sanders. They're going to try to out-nationalist populist Mike Pence. That's what I think that's what you're going to see. I think the days of trying to try to be that neocon, that despicable neocon kind of, Paul Ryan, John McCain, Mitt Romney, even Bush Jr., those days are over. Those days are gone. The Pat Buchanan right has risen, and that should be the new norm. And I think anyone who tries to bring back the never Trumper kind of neocon paradigm will just be laughed out of. Everyone from Rand Paul to Ted Cruz, they're all embracing this nationalist populist traditionalism in their own particular way. Rand Paul from a more libertarian perspective, but that's what I think. I think it's going to be really good over the next several years. Final myth is this is fascism, fascist Europe all over again. Christina K. Pat Buchanan was the original Trump, and you're 100% right, Christina, that you're 100% right. One thing you can actually do is if you take Buchanan's positions back in 92 and 96 and 2000 and you lay them out, and then you lay out Trump's positions, they are literally 1-to-1. They're literally parallel. It's stunning. Pat Buchanan could have been his Steve Bannon. He could have been his campaign manager in that sense and strategist. It's one of the reasons why I supported Trump from the very beginning, because I'm a big Buchanan fan. All right, so I'm talking with this fellow in the airport. He said, "How did you like all these wonderful guest stars? Dr. UKIP and Brexit Party will win the day." Pilgrim Driver, you're absolutely right. And that's what we're going to be seeing. We're going to actually be able to show why they're going to win the day, which is really cool. It's not just wishful thinking. We don't do wishful thinking on this channel. We try to do analysis and then give our projections based on the analysis. So far, we've been doing pretty well, haven't we? That's how the channel started. I started by predicting the Trump election, and we've been pretty good all the way throughout the European elections, the latest Israeli election and the like. And of course, Latin America too, we've been following. So I'm talking with this fellow, and he said, "How did you like Italy?" I said, "I loved it. It's wonderful. What brought you here?" And I said, "Actually, I was in a way kind of hanging out with your deputy prime minister, Matteo Salvini." And I thought it was kind of cool. And the fellow just, sorry, there you go, Samara, God bless. And I just said, yeah, so I thought it was, and of course I was still on the high from the whole conference. And he went, oh, and he had broken English. No like Salvini. And I said, no. And he goes, no. And I'll never forget. He's like, World War II. The too right. World War II, too right. And so that ghost, that specter still, of course, haunts Europe, particularly Italians, particularly Germans. And so it tends to be a myth. And the myth is very, very strong. I'm a huge fan. So much Steve is never going to be a threat to right-wing future elections for Trump. No, the demographic is not going to be a threat. It is an interim threat. Yes, it is an interim threat. Demographic changes right now because of immigration are a threat in the meantime, but it's a short-term threat. What scholars are finding, particularly Eric Kaufman in his book White Shift, is finding, and we're seeing it in Europe as well. It's very interesting. It's the same trends. It's funny. It's a little harder in Europe because the immigration is Islamic, and the Islamic immigration doesn't intermarry with the dominant culture as much, except for in France. Franco-Algerians and Franco-Moroccans intermarry upwards of about 70%. And then they get fully assimilated into the culture. I can't keep up with everything. Many thanks, high standards, intellectual nature, election, revolt against happy Easter. Happy Easter to you. Thanks, Selagan. Thank you so much. So they don't integrate as much in European culture, but there are more, for lack of a better term, they're just simply more whites in Europe who are going to hold on to the ethno-national tradition of their nation. Ethno-national traditions generally are connected with an ethnicity, but they don't have to be. So, for example, every single champion in sumo wrestling over the last 20 years has not been Japanese. They've been either Bulgarian or Mongolian or Polynesian. I think, if I recall, there was one Estonian who was very successful. So they love the Japanese ethno-nationalist culture, but they're not necessarily part of the ethnicity that gave birth to that culture. So it's wider than the ethnicity. But of course, the ethnicity tends to hold it and keep it together. So that's what you're looking for here. America has a smaller so-called white or Anglo-Protestant basis. But what we're finding is that among the immigrants that do come to the United States, they tend to be, unlike Europe, they tend to be more open to intermarriage. So, and then the intermarriage tends to be overwhelmingly, whenever you have a immigrant intermarrying a family, like my wife, the immigrant tends to overwhelmingly see themselves in relation to the dominant ethnicity and therefore the dominant ethno-nationalist tradition, as it were, ethnic nationalist tradition, I should say. And so, so we're seeing that, but that's going to take time. So when you're dealing with Latinos and Asians and so forth, over time, they are getting assimilated into the wider American culture. Their kids, 70% of which end up marrying into white American culture. And then their kids, 90% of which end up marrying into predominantly white American culture. And I use white very loosely and very inclusively. Okay, I consider my kids white, for example, even though they're half Asian. So, but what you see is they're very attracted to Asia, to whites, and so they're moving more and more into white culture, and over several generations that gets assimilated. And what we're finding today is even with the highest rates of intermarriage that we have, different cultural intermarriage, we have the highest rate of support for our conservative support for our traditions. So generally speaking, what you would expect to see is the more immigration, the more intermarriage that you have, the less support there is for our dominant sort of ethno-national traditions. It's the opposite. The more, what we're seeing actually, ironically, is a coterminous rise, where the more intermarriage that we're seeing, we're actually seeing a higher rise in a conservative approach to American culture. In Europe, it's a little bit more complicated, just in the sense there's not as much intermarriage, but the dominant ethnicity of a nation is still a bigger proportion of that nation. And so they just don't have as much of a threat for it to change the politics in any radical direction. So anyway, in the meantime, before all that assimilation takes place, yeah, it's a cultural Marxist mess. It's a multicultural mess, no question. The point is that this mess is temporary. It's not the new normal. Even in California, you're going to start seeing a melding into the predominant wider culture. So that's what Eric Kaufman's conclusions are in White Shift. And so this final myth is that this is just fascism all over again. The essential thing to get, and I didn't say this to this fellow, but bottom line, there is no scholar that I know of, and this is all I do every day. There is no scholar that I know of the nationalist right who will even remotely make the argument that they're fascists. Fascism was anti-democratic by definition, because fascism was all about loyalty to the state, and the state makes the nation state, and the state makes the decisions, not necessarily the people. It was not a populist movement by any stretch of imagination. It was much more of an aristocratic movement. Whereas the new nationalist populism is by definition democratic. Doesn't work without democracy. Democracy is actually at the very core of the way it thinks. Remember, we're talking about that redemptive democracy. The people are the best caretakers for nations, cultures, customs, and traditions. That's number one. Number two, fascism was imperialistic by definition. Fascism was all about pushing back communism on the one hand and capitalism, Western capitalism on the other. And it did so through a doctrine known as palingenesis. And the palingenesis has to do with this notion that the world is going to be reborn in a fascist makeover. Whereas what we're seeing today is nationalist populism contained within its borders. They just want their culture, custom, and traditions back. They have no intention whatsoever, none whatsoever, of imperialism. That's globalism. Globalism is the new imperialism, which is kind of the new fascism, not the new nationalism. So there you go. There's some of the differences there. Let's look now at what they call the 4 Ds. And this is going to say, there's our myths. We've dispelled the myths. So now the next thing we want to do, and this is the bulk of the book, is look at 4 trends that are propelling nationalist populists to victory everywhere. And they call them the 4 Ds. And the 4 Ds are distrust, destruction, deprivation, and de-alignment. So distrust, destruction, deprivation, and de-alignment. And these are each chapters in the book. And I'm just going to summarize each one of them for you. But this is what's really behind, in many respects. This is what is really behind this whole massive movement toward the nationalist, populist, and traditionalist right, these 4 Ds. All right. First one is distrust. We've been experiencing over the last few decades extremely high levels of political distrust, where the people see a massive gap opening up between themselves and their elites that govern them. As a matter of fact, Peter Berger, I think, is the one who described the United States as a nation of Indians ruled by Swedes, which is really cool. In other words, India, are technically the most religious people in the world. And the Swedes were, at least in this example, considered the most secular people in the world. And so this gap between the norms and the values, the customs and traditions of the people versus the elites is what is pushing this thing called distrust. So we have a lot of evidence for this. For example, in the United States, over half of those who were elected to Congress were millionaires in 2014. And that was equal Democrat and Republican. All of them are in the top 1% of America's income earners. In 2018, the net worth for a senator was $3.2 million, and a representative was $9,000. Are you guys getting interrupted? Are we getting interrupted? I see you said no sound. Are you guys good? I can hear you. Okay, thank you. Very good. Thank you very much. Just making sure we're all good. Excellent. Yeah, your average senator in 2018 was making $3.2 million, and your average representative was making $900,000. I mean, this is talk about a massive growing divide. A survey by the Chatham House, which is a British think tank, found that our elites believed. I'm sorry, 60% of our elites believed that mass immigration was good for our country. Only 25% of Americans believed that. Elites were twice as likely to reject the notion that immigration increases crime or puts a strain on our welfare system. So you can see this massive divide between this chasm between the way your populace is thinking, your common man is thinking, and these political economic elites. Identity politics, we were talking about this earlier, that's replaced for many left-wing elites, that's replaced the concerns of workers. So what they do is they listen to Hillary Clinton talk about African Americans, Latinos, LGBTs, women, but she never talked about the working class men and women. She never talked about working class whites, for example. And so you're seeing a growing divide, particularly in the Democratic Party, between the populace and the elites. And all the while, elites are actually living by the code of political correctness. All the while they're doing that, 75% of people polled find political correctness odious and dangerous, outright dangerous. And there was this is interesting, between 1964 and 2012, so this is between Lyndon Johnson and Barack Obama, okay? The percentage of people who felt that government was being run for the benefit of all citizens, it slumped from a high of 64%, that was during the 60s and Lyndon Johnson, down to 19%. The percentage of people thought it was the government ran only for the elite and for big business and big interests soared from 27% to 79%. In academia, we now know that Democrats outnumber Republicans 12-1 on average. In some places, it's as high as 60-1. Again, this is not representative of the populace, at large. It's an elite establishment institutionalization. And then in a Europe-wide poll, when asked, do you believe that politicians do not care about your concerns? 45% of Swedes, 52% in Germany, 58% of Brits, 67% in the United States, 71% in Poland, 72% in Italy said yes, they agreed with that. The continent average was 63%, that your average politician does not care about you. Guess which nation had one of the highest? At 78%, France. And what's going on in Paris right now, right? So, all right. So that's the first thing, is distrust, this growing distrust between the elites and the people. Secondly is destruction. That's the second D. And here, Eatwell and Goodwin note that more and more populations have strong and entrenched fears that this massive amount of immigration that we're seeing, and it is massive, it's grown several-fold over the last decade, is changing their nation for the worst. It is hurting their nation, their culture, their customs, their traditions, and they're very concerned about it. And when they're very concerned about it, they get lectured by politicians and the media and our educational elite for being, they get lambasted for being xenophobic and racist. Now, it's very important to understand. Racism, all studies show this, racism has been going down over the last decades, not up. It's very important to understand that. Racism has been going down, not up, okay? Velma Villar, God bless you. Thank you so much. Racism has been going down, not up, okay? So when you look at these polls that say, do you support intermarriage? When those polls were asked, say in the 1960s, 70s, 90% of Americans said, no, I don't like intermarriage. Today, when the same question is asked, it's a racist indicator. Do you agree with racial intermarriage? Now, 90% of Americans say, yeah, fine, no problem. When asked, would you work for an ethnic boss back in the day, 90% said no way. Today, 90% said sure, no problem. Would you live next door to someone of a different ethnicity? Back in the day, 90% said no. Today, 90% say no problem. Racism has been going down. Okay. All the studies show this. And one of the interesting studies that came out of Britain during Brexit was a question for people who supported Nigel Farage. And what they were asked is, first and foremost, do you think blacks are inferior? And what they found is 1 in 5 said yes. Now, that's still too high, but back in the day, that could have been 4 and 5 easily, right? So 1 in 5 said yes. So that's a comparatively, historically small percentage. But then when asked, are you concerned about Islam? All right, 2/3 said, 75% said, yeah, we are. So 66% said, yeah, we are. We're absolutely concerned about Islam. So what we're finding is this destruction trend is not a racist trend. It is a culturist. It's very concerned about culture. And studies are pointing that out. Thank you, the Teos. Thank you very much. Teos. Thank you. Yes, you're right. They are filled with nothing but idiots and crave naught but power. Absolutely. Well said. Hear, hear. So given that, it is no wonder that we're seeing a rise over concern over immigration. So in Europe, whereas in 2005, 14% of the population thought immigration was a problem, by 2016, that doubled. It hit around 30% of the population. Poll after poll after poll shows the number one concern among Europeans throughout Europe is immigration. And again, the politicians, the centrist parties, just simply ignore that. And there was a Mori poll that found that most believe that immigration was changing their nations in horrible and bad ways. So by definition, then we're seeing tremendous support for anyone immigrating into their nation to share language and culture with the respective nation to which they're immigrating. So, for example, polls show that more than 90% of Hungarians, Greeks, Poles, over 80% of Americans, Brits, Dutch, Italians, and French, and over 70% of Germans and Spanish, and over 60% of Swedes believe it is important for a nation's cultural heritage to be appreciated and embraced by all. And then when you ask about language, 95% of Dutch, Brits, Hungarians, Germans, French, Greeks, and Poles, 90% of Americans, Swedes, Spaniards, and Italians all believe everyone should know the national language of which they're a part. So we're seeing a definitely high concern for language and culture in, wasn't that Michael Savage? If you guys listen to Michael Savage, he was on to this several years back when he said the theme of his channel were borders, language, and culture. Borders, language, and culture. He's absolutely onto it. He's a huge Trump supporter right at the very beginning as well. This is very important. Trump won the vast majority of counties that were experiencing the highest rate of ethnic change in the United States between the years of 2000 and 2015. So if you were in a county that was experiencing massive, massive ethnic change between 2000 and 2015, it tended to vote Trump. It was the same in France. Those regions that were experiencing the highest immigration influxes tend to have the strongest support for Le Pen. In the Netherlands, it's the same thing. Those areas that polled strongest for their nationalist populist parties like the Forum for Democracy or the Dutch Freedom Party had the highest numbers of immigrants in them. And when you add that, the real threat of terrorism into all of that, that is a very, very concerning trend that's been going on now for 2 decades. People want immigration stopped. As a matter of fact, again, a Chatham House study found that 55% of people across 10 European nations they want all further immigration from Muslim nations stopped. Okay. So that's going to give you an important point there is this not racism. If you discount this as racism, not only are you not looking at the studies, okay, when these same people are asked, do you have any problem with somebody of a different ethnicity living next to you or intermarrying with your kids? They all say no. Okay. The vast majority does, and 8, 9 out of 10 or so. But when you ask them, are you concerned about this culture? Are you concerned about this religion coming in? That's when you start saying, yeah, this is a cultural issue that they're very, very concerned about. And remember, we talked about this, the ethno-cultural tradition. The ethno-cultural tradition is wider than any particular ethnicity. All right. Deprivation is the third trend. And deprivation is really the felt economic pressures by virtue of two things, and that's the loss of jobs on the one hand and the stagnation of wages that's contributing to a massive income discrepancy on the other. Loss of jobs, stagnant wages. What the globalist world has ushered in is basically what's known as a global division of labor. In a global division of labor, what has happened is that manufacturing and industry jobs have left the so-called first world, and they're increasingly moving into your global south, the so-called third world. Okay, and this largely was a hedge against inflation. When you had stagflation in the 1970s, what they found is if you opened up borders and you allowed costs of productions to go way down, that ended up killing the inflation. So as a hedge against inflation, nations in the West started opening up their borders and allowing these corporations to go transnational and ship a lot of their production overseas to bring the costs down. This, of course, in turn has brought the labor costs or labor wages down as well. And so they flatten out. And that flattening of wages combined with the loss of manufacturing and industry jobs has created tremendous economic angst among so-called blue-collar workers and a very, very large portion of the nation, and just anyone that is in any kind of employment. So, for example, within this global division of labor, not only are you seeing manufacturing and industrial jobs being shipped overseas, but you're seeing a tremendous amount of capital being relocated around urban areas in the first world, right, in the West in particularly. So what we're finding is very good. Yeah, the title. We all know globalism and socialism is communism disguised. Well said. It is imperialistic, no question about it. What we're seeing is all this money accumulate around, the finance centers, the urban areas, and that has raised prices, and it's raised income for those who are in finance, which has raised prices in the gentrified areas of the cities. So what rural folk are finding is there's no longer factory work for them anymore because they've all been shipped overseas. So they have to go into the urban areas to work, the metropolitan areas. But they can't live in those metropolitan areas because the prices have been jacked up because of the scalability of the careers of those who are in finance. So they have to commute. And this is what happened in France. They have to commute long distances. And then there's no jobs where they live, or there's no work where they live, and they can't live where they have to work, right? So they have to do this very long, massive commute. And on top of that, Macron slaps a fuel tax on them, and they blew up. And you have the yellow vest uprising, right? Which is my next book, by the way, which I'm looking very for. Well, wait a minute now. I have a couple in the queue, as it were. I think it's my third book coming out on the yellow vest uprising, which I'm excited about. It's really, really cool. So check this out. This is very, very interesting stuff, just to give you a sense of things. In 1965, CEOs were paid about 20 times their employees' salary. In 2012, it was 350 times their employees' salary. That's how insane the rise in income has had among the so-called 1%. In 2015, Wall Street bonuses, accumulated $30 billion, a total $30 billion. In the same year, all Americans working for minimum wage totaled $14 billion. That was less than half. We have more money. We are richer than ever before. And yet nearly half of Americans work for less than $22 an hour. So this is kind of the angst. That's what's going on. 55% of Americans, 64% of Brits, 77% of Germans agreed with the statement, the poor get poorer and the rich get richer in our crony capitalist system. This is why Trump pushed economic nationalism. This is why virtually every nationalist, populist, traditionalist party out there is pushing some kind of economic nationalism. We need to be able to make rising wages our key goal. And you do that by cutting off the globalist division of labor. If you are going to ship manufacturing jobs overseas, no problem. But when you try to ship your goods back into the nation of origin that you're from, well, then we're going to tax you to the hilt. And we're going to make sure that people who would have benefited from those manufacturing jobs are going to benefit from that tax. So that's what the new economic nationalism really is all about. All right. That's deprivation. Finally, de-alignment. How are we doing? Yeah, we're going to be wrapping it up here. Finally, de-alignment. De-alignment, this is what we're seeing with the Brexit party getting now 27% support. De-alignment notices that the bonds between voters and their traditional parties have been breaking down, which is making it easier for new political challengers to come up and take the nation in new directions. So what's happening is indicative of a political paradigm shift, okay? You got the center left, center right. They've dominated globalist politics for decades. But they refuse to address these three issues that we've been dealing with. They refuse to address the distrust and the gap between their values and the values of the populace. They refuse to address the destruction to the cultures that's being caused by immigration, and they refuse to look at the economic deprivation that's being caused by this globalist division of labor. They're just deaf ears won't listen. So what's happening is now parties to the left and to the right are forming, so-called far left, far right parties are forming that are addressing these issues, that are getting more popular, and in so doing, they're squeezing out the center parties, and they're now becoming the new mainstream, and that's the paradigm shift, the political and economic traditionalist paradigm shift that we're seeing. Check this out. In the United States in the 1950s and 60s, 75% of people identified very strongly either with Democrats or Republicans, okay? In 2000, that dropped to 59%. And in 2014, it dropped to 56%. So that is going down. Any kind of loyalty to our two-party system is starting to really erode in the American electorate. We're seeing the same thing in Britain, where the writing was on the wall long before the Brexit referendum. Whereas in the 1960s, half the population, 50%, identified strongly either with one of the two traditional parties. By 2015, it was only 13%. I saw one poll, if I recall, just the other day, where Brexit, where you stand on Brexit, the majority of Brits have a very strong opinion on that. But you ask them, do you have a very strong alliance or identity with one of the major parties, the Tories or the Conservatives and Labor? I think it was less than 10%. Only about 8% said sure. Yeah. So what we're seeing is a collapse of the traditional bonds that used to be held between the electorate and the center left, center right parties, and then now that's making room for these political entrepreneurs to come in and say, we got something for you. Like I said, in Israel right now, Labor's dead. Labor got 6% of the vote. Labor's gone. Labor has been squeezed completely out. The so-called far-right parties combined got almost 3 times that amount. So, I mean, this is what we're seeing. The center left is done. Democrats are going to die. That's what I mean in our nation. And again, this was Donald Trump. Donald Trump was a third-party candidate who won a major party nomination. So he's transforming the party from within. We're seeing these patterns throughout regarding in Germany. In the 1970s, more than half of West Germans felt a strong allegiance to a party. By 2009, it dropped to 1 in 3 people, about 33%. And then, of course, that shows you where AfD, the Alternative for Germany, came in. About 2 million people who voted for Brexit didn't vote in the previous election, the previous British election. They just didn't see anybody representing their concerns. And, in addition, we see this interestingly here. We saw all these defections away from the Democrats to Donald Trump and the Republicans, whereas 4% of Hillary's supporters voted for Mitt Romney in 2012. Trump won 13% of Obama's voters. Labor's dead, but Zehut and the New Right got no seats. Likud is more of a traditional right party. That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Quantum Football. Yeah. It's complicated there in Israel, but particularly some of the Orthodox parties helped to make up for that. They got, if I recall, both the two Orthodox parties got 8%, so 16%. Next, repair of the damage has been done to Christianity in the West. Amen to that. Given the vitriol against us by the powers that be and the misleading media and the privileged status of Islam, whose ideas cannot be challenged. Yeah, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. I think Notre Dame will be a symbol of the rebuilding of, or can be a symbol of the rebuilding of Christianity. The French were devastated when they saw Notre Dame burning, and they were singing these beautiful, beautiful hymns as it was burning, just in praise to God and of this glorious Western civilization that we've been given. Yes, the Western church is going to have to go through renewal, very similar to what's going on in the East with the Russian Orthodox and Eastern Orthodox churches right now. What's going on in Russia is stunning. The Journal for the Scientific Study of Religion, 2012 edition, concluded Russia is going through nothing less than a full-blown Christian revival. And it is a revival in a nationalist sense. It's becoming a part of a nation. We're not talking about personal sentiments. That's there, but it's becoming part of the lifeblood of society. And it's amazing. I've talked to people. I've never been to Russia. I've talked to people who have been, like Eben Tranholm. If you know Eben's work, Eben does fantastic work. She's got a great YouTube channel. You want to check it out. Brand new. I think she only has 3 videos up there. One of them's a poor, sad little interview with me, but she's fantastic. She went out there to study the effects of this renewed Russia, and she said it's amazing. The Christianity is in the air that you're breathing. It's absolutely stunning. You're seeing it in Hungary. The church is being revitalized there. Now, again, it's a different kind of way of doing church. It's more part of society. It's part of the culture. It's everyday. People wake up and just feel a sense that Christian civilization is being reborn in our midst. Poland, by all means. So yeah, definitely we're going to have to see this, especially in Britain, France, and certainly in Denmark and the Netherlands, Scandinavia, and the United States as well. The United States is going to have to get out of just a lot of its kind of pietistic sort of stuff. Salvini coalition should win one for the Kipper after the Notre Dame fire. Well said. Amen. Very good. I think they will. They're doing terrific. Jacob, thank you for giving me a deeper understanding of political movements going on now. Your channel has taught me so much. Looking for. Thank you, Jacob. That is so sweet of you. Thank you, brother. That's why I do it. I love it. I love interacting with you guys. It is. My students could tell you. I talk about my YouTube channel and you guys, my audience, all the time with them. We just absolutely love this kind of, this worldwide classroom that we have to bring nationalist populists all together in just an extraordinary, mutual edification. So let me finish up this part here. So Hillary gets 4% of Romney voters, whereas Trump gets 13%, literally 3 times of Obama voters. Trump got counties that in Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan, and Pennsylvania that voted Democrat in every election since the 1980s. And he ended up winning some of those counties by more than 15%. That's how he won those 4 states. Remember, that was called the Blue Wall. Hillary's supposed to get all these states, but no matter, she lost Florida, no matter, she lost Virginia, no matter, because she's got Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. That's the blue wall. And Trump crushed the blue wall. He smashed it. And he smashed it because of these defections. Particularly white working class did not feel like voting for someone so dedicated to cultural Marxism and to identity politics and the politics and the identity of anybody and everybody except white working class people. And so they went to Trump. This is not Russian collusion. This is the squeezing out of the center left from the mainstream of politics by a renewed nationalist populism coming from both the left and the right. So it's very, very fascinating. So there you have it. Our 4 Ds, as it were, 4 trends: distrust, destruction, deprivation, and de-alignment. These dynamics are largely responsible for turning the world to the nationalist populist right. One of the ways that this is already affecting the world, but particularly Europe, the nationalist populist right, is they're already trends. In order for the center right not to get squeezed out, what's the center right doing? It's starting to adopt the nationalist populism. So nationalist populism is either winning straight out, like Thierry Baudet did, or something like that. It's either winning completely, or what's more common is that the center right is embracing it. The center right is coming in and saying, okay, we'll adopt your position. We'll sound more like nationalists and populist traditionalists. So if you think it through, Jobbik pulled Fidesz more to the nationalist right. And what Viktor Orban did is he basically took Jobbik's nationalist populist traditionalism and he just made it Fidesz, and boom, his party gets a supermajority, right? The Austrian Freedom Party, Heinz-Christian Strache, has been pulling the Austrian People's Party. Sebastian Kurz basically adopted their platform. Boom, they get a 60% supermajority in the Austrian parliament. The Italian League, Matteo Salvini, has been pulling Forza Italia together with the Brothers of Italy fully into the nationalist populist fold. Even the People's Party for Freedom and Democracy in the Czech Republic has been pulling the center-right ANO party thoroughly into the nationalist populist realm. Vox Party in Spain has turned the more center-right People's Party, and commentators are writing about this every day. They cannot get over how now the People's Party sounds like Trump. People's Party was your center-right party, and as well as Ciudadanos. Ciudadanos is in Spain is. It's almost going to be kind of like your Five Star in Italy, a kind of it was almost left populist party, but now more and more commentators saying now they're identifying with the right. They want welfare chauvinism. They want to cut off, welfare only for citizens, not for immigrants, things like that. They're adopting very right wing. And to mention that even the Social Democrats in Denmark and Die Linke, which is kind of a far left party in Germany, they're all adopting welfare chauvinism. They're all saying the borders have to be closed. So now nationalist populist traditionalism, like in Israel, is becoming pre-political. It's becoming pre-political. Even the left now is starting to adopt it. And the moment it becomes pre-political, we've won. That's what we're looking for on this channel ultimately, is what nations now have nationalist populist traditionalism, the end result of these 4 Ds, what nations have enshrined those as the new normal. You're not a legitimate party until you explain how you are going to curb immigration, hold the borders secure, how you're going to impart some kind of economic nationalism, and how you're going to protect our cultures, our customs, and traditions from globalist erosion. Now, okay, left, right, discuss. Tell us how you're going to do it. That's what is happening. It is becoming pre-political. This is not a fluke. Brexit and Trump were not the result of misinformed voters, and the latter was certainly not the result of Russian collusion. They were the result of 4 main trends that have been going on for decades now that are just now bubbling to the surface, and we all get to spend each and every day, celebrating them and enjoying them together. All right, everyone. I think that's going to do it for me. I've been up since 5 today. So do you think the burning of Notre Dame is symbolism of the state of the West? No, I don't. Seek, destroy. I hear you. I've seen some commentaries on that. No, I tend to have a very optimistic view of the West. Like I said, things are rough right now. We're in a strange, it's globalism versus nationalism, and the clash is strange and bizarre. There's actually even a strange, bizarre term called globalism. Globalism is when you combine globalism with a, traditionalist inspired or localism, nationalist inspired, and you get globalism, and it's all these contradictions. When I was in Verona, Italy, I saw this beautiful, 14th century building, 15th century building. I was like, oh, look at how wonderful. And at the bottom, it said McDonald's, and it was a storefront for McDonald's. And I looked at my wife and I said, that, my dear, is called globalism. Okay. Two-headed monster, something like that. Yeah, it's ugly. But if you follow these trajectories, we're only getting stronger. Nationalism is growing. Globalism is shrinking. We're converting. People are moving away from their parties. They're defecting. Probably better than converting. Defecting. And no, I have a very optimistic view. You've got to keep your eye on the long-term trends. That should be a tune. You got to keep your eye on the long-term trends. Longitudinal analysis. That's what you got to do. And you're always refining it. It's never static. You're always refining it. But keep your eye. And that's how we're making our predictions here. We make our predictions when Finland is getting their vote ready last Sunday. I am looking for the true Finns, or they're just called the Finns Party now, but I'm looking for the Finns Party to actually be growing. I'm not sitting and go, yeah, no, people are too stupid. They're not going to get more than 5%. Remember, they were polling at 8% at one point. They're polling at 8%. They missed being the number one party in Finland by 0.2%. I mean, what we were doing is we're watching them grow because of these trends. We knew the Sweden Democrats would do well. Now, of course, we want the Sweden Democrats to hit, 29%. They probably will, but you're going to have to give this time longitudinally. And as long as you know that, you can have the confidence that no matter what happens, no matter what, blip hits, long term, we're good. So very good. All right, guys. Well, I got to move on. It's great. Thank you so much for sticking with this. It's a long one. What is this? We're at about an hour and a half. I put you to work here, right? So thank you so much for being with us tonight. I hope you enjoyed the book. Like I said, I will put, when we close out, I'll put a link down below so you can grab it on Amazon. National Populism, The Revolt Against Liberal Democracy, Roger Eatwell, Matthew Goodwin. Check out Matthew Goodwin's scholarship just in general on numerous websites. He does excellent work. And I couldn't recommend the book more highly. I think it's going to give you all the data you need to show you that we are actually in the midst of a very, very big picture trend, several trends, that's going to affect politics for as far as I think the eye can see at this point. So, all right, everyone, a wonderful evening to all of you. God, and a wonderful Good Friday to each and every one of you, and a beautiful and blessed happy Easter. God bless.